In 2008, an adult website suddenly posted a video that sent shockwaves through the public. The footage showed a young woman, completely naked, alongside several men on a bed. Thousands of vulgar, crude, and mocking comments flooded the site without pause, but among them, a few comments stood out. They read, "Look closely, that's Suzane. She's a murderer." The online community was thrown into confusion. Was the woman in the video really Suzane? And if it was her, who had she killed? Were the men in the video her victims or someone else? What was the truth behind this story, and what had actually happened to this woman? São Paulo, Brazil. A wealthy, exclusive neighborhood reserved for the country's upper class. This was home to a prosperous couple, Manfred and Mauricia. They married in the 1970s and were seen as the perfect example of a successful, happy family. In the years that followed, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Suzane, born in 1983, and later their youngest son, Andreas. The family of four lived in a luxurious house worth around $1 million USD, complete with 11 bedrooms. Inside, nothing was lacking. A private library, a swimming pool, a home office, everything one could imagine. At that time, the couple's total assets were estimated at around 29 million United States dollars. Of that, over 6 million United States dollars was already in Suzane's name, set to automatically become hers once she reached adulthood. But it seemed that Suzane couldn't wait. Until the day she officially inherited that massive fortune at around 4 a.m. on October 30th, 2002. While the neighborhood was still fast asleep, a tragedy struck this seemingly perfect family. In this elite, heavily secured area, a place where crime was virtually unheard of, the silence of the night was suddenly shattered by desperate screams. In shock, the neighbors realized the voice belonged to Suzane, and it was coming from her family's house. The neighbors immediately rushed to Suzane's house, only to be horrified to find the bodies of her parents, Manfred and Mauricia, lying dead in extremely disturbing positions. They immediately called the police. The police quickly arrived at the scene. Through the initial investigation and examination, it was revealed that the bodies of the wealthy couple had been almost completely destroyed, to the point of being unrecognizable, allegedly due to a brutal beating. In addition, the police discovered documents scattered all over the place, suggesting that a thief might have broken in, targeting the valuables in the house. However, several crucial inconsistencies emerged as police launched their investigation. One particularly suspicious detail in what was initially believed to be a simple burglary was this: how could a thief possibly break into a highly secured, well-guarded home, one with round-the-clock security and a 24/7 alarm system, and silently, flawlessly murder both Manfred and Mauricia without raising any suspicion? It seemed almost impossible. Realizing this was not an ordinary robbery, the police launched a more thorough investigation into those connected to Suzane's family. It wasn't long before they uncovered the presence of two suspicious individuals, with questionable movements linked to transactions and interactions with Suzane in the period leading up to the murders. Daniel and Christian. The police quickly summoned Daniel and Christian to the station for questioning. During the interrogation, Daniel repeatedly denied any involvement in the crime. However, unlike his seemingly composed younger brother, Christian broke down under pressure and confessed everything. Soon after, Daniel could no longer deny the truth. The story began in August 1998, when Suzane's family attended a model aircraft exhibition at Ibirapuera Park because Andreas had a deep interest in planes. At the event, Andreas met and was fascinated by the works of Daniel, who was 18 years old at the time. Realizing Daniel's talent, Mr. Manfred, the father of Andreas and Suzane, suggested that Daniel teach his son how to build model airplanes. But he had no idea that this seemingly knowledgeable young man, capable of crafting intricate model planes, was actually an undercover member of a notorious criminal gang in Brazil. No one could have imagined that from that chance encounter, forbidden romance would begin to bloom between 15-year-old Suzane and Daniel. To Suzane, a teenage girl who had never experienced a romantic relationship, Daniel seemed like a mature, admirable man. His passion for airplanes, combined with his slightly arrogant demeanor, quickly captivated her. On the other hand, Daniel was drawn to Suzane's intelligence and wealthy background. It was these contrasts that made them increasingly infatuated with one another. However, both Suzane and Daniel were determined to keep their relationship a secret from her parents, fearing strong disapproval. However, contrary to what Suzane feared, her parents' reaction upon accidentally discovering the relationship was surprisingly lenient. They allowed the two to date and even treated Daniel well, believing he was about to enroll in law school, though in reality, that was a lie Daniel made up. Later on, Suzane provided Daniel with significant financial support. Not only that, but Daniel's brother, Christian, also relied on Suzane's help to get by. One day, when Suzane's parents noticed unusual changes in her bank account and suspicious spending habits, they began investigating Daniel's background and uncovered the truth behind his lies. At that point, Suzane's parents refused to accept the relationship and demanded that she break up with Daniel. In order to deceive them, the two pretended to end things but secretly continued seeing each other. Things escalated when Suzane followed Daniel into a criminal gang. There, besides Daniel, Suzane also engaged in sexual relationships with multiple other men at the same time. Videos of those encounters were recorded and spread across dark websites. By chance, Daniel learned about a $6 million inheritance Suzane would receive upon graduating from university. At that time, she was only 19 and would have to wait almost 2 more years to access the money. So, Daniel devised a horrifying plan to get his hands on that fortune immediately, without waiting. On October 30th, 2002, at 12:30 a.m., while both her father and mother were sleeping, Suzane lured her younger brother Andreas out of the house to attend a Halloween party. A while later, Suzane quietly sneaked out alone to meet Daniel and his brother Christian. After everything was arranged, Suzane returned to the house alone, turned off the alarm system, and calmly sat down on the sofa to wait for the two brothers to arrive and massacre her own parents. Truth so horrifying that anyone who heard it was left in shock and disbelief. It was Suzane herself who led those strangers into the house to slaughter the people dearest to her. Afterwards, she pretended to be in shock, acting as if she had just discovered the horrifying scene of her parents lying dead on their bed. The case was brought to light, but the question of who was the mastermind remained difficult to answer. The police intensified their interrogation of Christian, and he constantly insisted that everything that happened was under Suzane's orders. Immediately afterward, the police shifted their focus to her, as she had shown strange behavior from the very beginning of the case. At this point, Suzane began to claim her innocence through interviews with journalists and local newspapers, saying that Daniel had given her some kind of drug, and she remembered nothing about that night until she woke up and discovered that both her parents were dead. Some human rights organizations also started to support the young girl who had just lost her parents. As a result, the evidence began to tilt in Suzane's favor, especially since the two brothers, Daniel and Christian, were at a disadvantage early on due to their past drug offenses and the fact that they had used drugs shortly before the crime took place. However, a major turning point occurred during the investigation when Suzane's defense lawyer, who had previously been her parents' personal attorney, released an audio recording of a conversation between himself and Suzane. Immediately, public support for Suzane began to rapidly decline, and human rights organizations no longer stood up to protect her. In the recording, Suzane said, "What should I do to put the blame on Daniel? And how should I behave in front of the cameras?" The lawyer replied, "It makes no difference now, everything's over. Daniel is crying and staying silent." "What did you say to him?" Daniel had said, "I love her. but she gave the order. The lawyer added, "All I need to do is find out the truth." Suzane pleaded, "I don't want to be arrested, please, I really don't remember. I'm not well. I'm in so much pain at night, I beg you." Finally, on July 7, 2006, 4 years after Suzane's parents were murdered, after multiple court hearings, Suzane was sentenced to 40 years in prison for murder. The brothers Daniel and Christian were convicted as accomplices and received the same sentence. Considering the ages of Suzane, 23 years old, Daniel, 26 years old, and Christian at the time, this was considered the heaviest possible sentence. In Brazil, the verdict also concluded that Suzane was an accomplice in the murder of her own parents. However, whether she was truly the mastermind behind it remains something no one knows for sure to this day. Even after being imprisoned, they continued to blame and resent each other. What's even more shocking is that the assets of her deceased parents will likely belong to Suzane when she is released from prison in 2042. By then, at the age of 59, Suzane could once again become a billionaire. Today's video ends here. Thank you all for watching until the very end. See you in the next videos. Goodbye.